Welcome to the In-Betwixt and the In-Between. This is Leadership Limbo, a podcast aimed at helping leaders embrace the discomfort and power of leading themselves and others in the midst of it all. We blend real insight with practical tools to help you lead with self-awareness, purpose, and influence wherever you are on your leadership journey. Josh, hey man, how's it going?
Hey John, did I hear that right? Is this now called Leadership Limbo? What's going on?
This is called the rebranding episode on multiple fronts, which I think we'll get to. But yeah, Leadership Limbo, that's our new name we're working with. Josh, you've been kind of in the midst of this most recently. Do you want to share, speaking of being in the middle of things, do you want to share with folks what's going on here?
Yeah, we're in the midst of a trademark war. Actually, not even our own trademark. Yeah, we were notified that liminal leadership is a trademarked term. And so we are reputable citizens who honor and follow the law, and therefore we will be making these adjustments and rebranding this as Leadership Limbo, which we do believe is still the same essence as our previous title. So yeah, but two competing entities on the East Coast are fighting over the term liminal leadership. So we were onto something. We just didn't know that it was such a contentious battle.
We are not bringing the West into this battle.
The West is going to stay out of it. So welcome to Leadership Limbo.
What I think is kind of funny here is the amount of time we spent talking about the word liminal and would people know it or would they think it was too nerdy? And turns out it's liked enough that someone trademarked it.
Yeah. And not only in the United States, but also in the European Union.
The European Union.
It's it's a popular term, and we're no longer in this liminal space of liminal leadership.
Yeah, I do want to say, I think limbo, as we were kind of looking at the ideas, it is, I think, more commonplace as a term than liminal, even though they're kind of similar. We also know that limbo is this idea of being stuck, and we really want to stick with this idea of the middle of something, or you are in this in-between space, and limbo from concepts of how we think about it in normal, language and in the way we talk about it. And Dante certainly came up with this. We won't be jumping into the inferno at all here, but we do think it's not just a place to be stuck, but actively work out of it. And again, we still think that really fits in with middle management, middle level leadership.
Yeah.
It can feel like a place of limbo, right? It really can. And we want to talk about, we'll use that space to learn, to grow, and as a person who's in the middle of it, to, as we're going to talk about later on, is catalyze your people and your organization through your leadership. So excited. I think the term will still hold weight to what we're trying to do here.
Absolutely. Yeah, so that's where we're at, learning every day, and excited to continue to bring you content. And thank you to all of the listeners who provided us with feedback and ideas. We're excited to apply those as we move forward. Just to go back to the previous episode, we are educators at heart, so we're checking on your homework. And we left you in the previous episode with a 3-2-1 reflection. And in that reflection, the 3 represented 3 places where you, as a leader, are currently thriving or feeling as if you are truly doing the work of leading others, as opposed to perhaps like the limited definition of management. And then we asked you to challenge yourself to think about 2 opportunity spaces where you could think differently about leading more intentionally, and then 1 action that you hopefully took or will be taking to move on that level of, or to move on resolving that opportunity or challenge that you were facing. We're obviously not able to go beyond just reminding you that that was hopefully a valuable exercise to take last week, and hopefully it led to a little inertia this week. And we'll come back to this every week with a previous reference, and hopefully that will be helpful for you. But I'm going to turn it over to John, who's going to share more today about this concept of almost rebranding the concept of manager.
Yeah. And I actually think this fits in well, that if you've done that 3-2-1 exercise and thought about your leadership overall, it's going to be an interesting way into our conversation here about management and the word of manager. And so to what Josh said, and we mentioned this earlier as part of this rebranding episode, I personally have a real strong desire to make sure that anyone who's listening and anyone out there thinks about manager in a very different way than I think it's often, shared or thought about or kind of referred to. Many people probably think of manager or managing, and they get this icky feeling. It's almost like a dirty word in leadership circles or in just organizational structures. And I think that's kind of derivative, right? You've probably seen these before if you're on social media of any sort, certainly on LinkedIn. You'll often see a T chart. And folks will put out these posts about leadership, and on one side of the T chart they have leadership, and on the other one they have manager. And on that left side under leader, you hear things such as visionary, empowering, clear communicator. Manager is micromanaging, telling you the rules but not giving you freedom. I mean, it's all these negative things, right? And I think that's unfortunate. And I will often respond to those of saying, I think this is a derivative way to look at managing. I think managing is a very powerful form of leadership and different than I think sometimes when we think about the visionary leader. Very different skill sets and both important in their own ways, but very different. And if we don't think about that, if you're a mid-level leader, you actually might be spending most of your time doing the wrong type of leadership, frankly, in my opinion. So a great, the reason I think that this is really important, as an example, I was talking to a leader this week at a charter network here in Denver, and she noted that with their leaders this week, or this early part of the year, their motto for them in terms of their development this year is management matters. And I thought that was really insightful. And this is not the first time I've heard any organization or group of people say that we're really focusing with our leaders on management. And so why is that important? I think we'll get into those, but some of them are often people who are new to leadership, and this isn't just true of the teaching profession, but many other industries, you get promoted because you were good at a certain skill, right? And so people say, well, you're good at it, and now we want you to lead a team to be good at it. But as we're going to say, just because you're good at it does not mean that you can often get others to be effective unless you know how to work through those folks. And so I really thought that was really insightful what she said, that they're actually going to take time with their leaders to talk about management as a skill, because too often organizations don't help people to become better managers, right? Or if they do, it's really about how to stamp the timesheet, how to approve certain processes, but rarely about things like leveraging people's strengths. How does that align to company goals? So I'm going to go a little bit deeper and talk about that. Josh, just would love to get your reactions to that or anything you would add to that.
No, I think that's a great way to cover for the concept. And words matter and connotation matters. And of course, just because we're saying all of this in a single podcast doesn't mean that the connotation of manager will change. Part of that, truthfully, is up to you as the leader, as the manager, to be responsible for your own rebranding. And what I mean and what we mean by that is the idea of you're going to have to live it out. You can't just sit there and say, well, I like for you to think of me as a really different form of manager. You can say that, and then you have to align it to action. And that's really the goal behind this podcast, is how to equip each of us with tools to make that experience between the person being led and you as the leader, the manager, whatever title you want to apply to it, to make that lived experience one that feels supportive. And as we'll introduce today, the idea of thinking of this managerial position as a catalyst role.
Yeah.
And so, John, I want to turn it back to you. I think there's a quote that you might want to share here that I think grounds us in some of this. And there's a book that you keep referencing. I have not read it. I think I've read quotes from it, but I think it sounds like it's a great recommendation. We could even put that in the comments, but tell us more. You brought this up with me before we recorded today.
Yeah, I can't get this out of my head, though, before we move on. You said just because we talk about it here doesn't mean it's going to rebrand it. You know what, though, followers, I know there's not hundreds and thousands of you yet, but I'm encouraging you to go out there and fight for the word manager as a positive word. In the words of Tobias Bluth from Arrested Development, there are dozens of us, dozens. Okay, so just you have power, and I encourage you to kind of tell people that being a manager is a really powerful position and a wonderful position, and stand up for it. So the book is called First Break All the Rules. So again, First Break All the Rules. It's a book about management. It was actually one of the first books that was given to me or recommended to me when I became a leader. And I think that was actually pretty a blessing of sorts for me, because I actually started it by framing my view as a leader in this manager concept, versus I think sometimes when we jump into leadership, we all want that idea of being the visionary leader, creating where this company is going to go in 5 to 10 years, that's going to make it more profitable, or that's going to be incredibly innovative. And that's great, but most of us are in this space, actually. That's what I'm going to talk about here. So a great quote from it, and I'll read it right here. As with all catalyst, the manager's function is to speed up the reaction between two substances, thus creating the desired end product. Specifically, the manager creates performance in each employee by speeding up the reaction between the employee's talent and the company's goal, and between the employee's talent and the customer's needs. So we love this idea of a manager as a catalyst. I would also argue that the thing you're actually trying to catalyze is the people you manage's talents and their strengths. That's actually the fuel, is those strengths the destination is the goal of the company. That's where you're trying to get this engine, right? I am in charge of catalyzing it. So I have to do the combustion in order to use the fuel of my people's strengths to get there. And so love that image, would encourage you to really think about that, maybe use that as a metaphor with your leaders who are managing folks. But it's you have the job of working within an organization to get towards goals, to get towards whatever your team output needs to be to get closer to those goals. But you have to do it with the team you have. So we want to really talk about the parts to this. Okay. So I'm going to go through the first one here. This one is you have to know and internalize the goals and vision of the company. This is actually worth a whole episode by itself, is this idea of the work of when you are, and we talked about this a little bit last time, you are executing on a vision that is not your own. It was set by the company. Maybe it was set by your boss. Maybe it's set by the board, whatever it might be. How do you internalize that? How do you understand that? How do you get yourself on board with it so you can get others there? So this first step is you have to really invest in knowing your company's vision and making sure that you're doing the internal work to understand it so that you are so compelled by it, it feels like your own vision. It feels like something you're bought into. So then you can do the work of figuring out how your team is going to effectively, accomplish that goal or get closer to accomplishing the vision of the entire network based on your role within it or organization. And so, I think that's step one. And you need to know that. And Josh will talk about how then people's strengths need to then align with those goals. But Josh, other ideas or ways that maybe examples of ways that you have done the work of internalizing a vision at places you've worked, so then you can lead people more effectively towards that vision.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think just high level, because I think to your point, like so many topics in this podcast, we can get into any of these in great depth. And I know John and I would be more than happy to spend plenty of time discussing this. I think big picture, though, is the first thing is know that it is important to have this vision. And sure, you could say, well, my senior leader maybe doesn't talk about it all the time, but that gives you opportunity to do that. If it's written down, it exists. Hopefully it lives itself out because of the people who help carry it out. And so I would say the big piece, just big picture, is know what it is and bring it up. Talk about it. Talk about it with your manager sometimes, your boss, but also make sure to talk about it with your people. If it's the right vision and it's not discussed, it's not going to become a reality. Yeah. So keeping it simple there, that's what I would say. And any last notes kind of on kind of these? Okay, cool.
No, I'm ready for you to jump into our kind of second layer of what managers do here.
Yeah, and you brought this up. And before that, I didn't know you were such a proficient mechanic with all of these references to combustion and engines. We didn't talk about fuel injectors or pistons or camshafts, but maybe that can be our bonus episode.
I love it.
Yeah. But when it comes to another thing you did say, John, is you brought up the idea of knowing your people. And I had a good conversation with an old friend yesterday who runs a industrial factory in the Midwest. And he talked a lot about this in different terms, different language. But basically he said, I have to get out of my office and walk around and spend time getting to know who my people are. And I think that's such an important part of building culture, building an effective team, is that you have to be able to communicate and know each other. And as a manager, one of the ways that you truly catalyze growth in your organization is by catalyzing the people that you lead. And I've heard this said different ways, but the essence of this concept is that you get more from people more quickly, more effectively, more rapidly when you build on the current strengths that they have as opposed to focusing in on their weaknesses. And that's actually guidance for ourselves as well. When we set our goals, we do our morning journal, whatever it might be, we might sit there and write down 5 things that we all need to get better at. I have to be more disciplined with my routine. I need to eat healthier. I need to exercise more. I need to blank, blank, and blank. And I would challenge all of us to say, like, when we did our last internal reflection, was the majority of what we wrote down a list of things that we're not so good at? It could be. It was for me this morning. And as I'm saying this out loud, I recognize that we all have that tendency at times to kind of focus in on the opportunities or weaknesses, whatever you want to call it. But if you're a manager who's only focusing on people's opportunities for growth and not building on their strengths, you're going to be limiting the effectiveness and efficacy of that person and of the goals of your organization. People bring their strengths to the table right off the bat, and making sure you both understand those and can apply the right role, the right responsibilities, the right projects and opportunities to that person that can build on as many of their strengths as possible is going to be a much faster catalyst to success in your organization.
Yep.
So our first question I would ask you is, what are you doing to know the strengths of your team? And I would even push to say, go a little bit beyond the surface, right? Our own tendencies might be to make assumptions about a quieter person might not have a strength that we think exists in their ability to communicate with others, but maybe we don't know that. Maybe we just
Yeah.
haven't seen it. So how are you challenging yourself as a leader to say, I truly know the strengths? Have you asked the person you manage,
Boom. I was going to mention that. Yep.
what are your strengths? I don't know you that well. I think I'd like to get to know you better, but what are your strengths? Like, what do you do well inside? What do you do well outside of work? If we haven't asked that question, we're assuming that we're the expert of somebody else's life. And that's a pretty tough place to start. It's not true. They
Yep.
are the expert of their own life. Ask the question, what are your strengths? You might find that some people are less willing to kind of be quote unquote braggadocious or like speak, with self-affirmation. That's our responsibility to see it in them and affirm them. And maybe even point out a strength to somebody that they maybe haven't seen, but start with the other person, ask them, and then of course, add into what you've observed. Then I'd say, like, how are you drawing that strength out? And in the context of your workspace, what are you doing to ensure that that person is set up for success? I hear this a lot. I hear the phrase, I just don't have the right people on the team. Well, I would challenge that as your first or second instinct. You probably do have the right people on the team, but I would argue that there's other root causes as to what might be happening. No, I'm not talking about the employee who shows up late 5 days a week and the employee who just maybe brings a very toxic attitude. Like, of course, we can make the case for these edge scenarios, but those are edge cases. I would argue that we've made initially the decision to hire a person because of their resume, their experience, their character, the qualities
Yeah.
that we've seen. You probably have the right people on your team, but as a manager, part of your responsibility is really making sure that they are set up to be in a position of success, aligning the right role to their skills, their qualities,
Yeah.
and strengths.
Well, I want to in first
Yeah.
break all the rules.
Yeah.
They talk about this in the way of if you actually find yourself, because I think a lot of people here are saying like, oh, but I'm just trying to fix people's problems all the time. I bet there's a lot of folks who are listening to this who think that if you find yourself managing around weaknesses more than leveraging strengths, then that's what they refer to as a casting problem. And I don't want this to be a podcast that's like a lot. We think a lot of things can be fixed by good management, including developing folks. So don't take this as, hey, step one is fire people. But I will say if you are managing your own weaknesses more than that, I think can probably do two or three things. One is, does that mean there's something about my approach that's wrong and I'm not seeing the strengths of this person? Second, I think before you think about get this person off the bus is, do their strengths actually match up with what I'm asking them to do? And if not, should we shift something? And then third, if ultimately it's just not a good fit for the role and for what they need to accomplish, or I think what you mentioned, Josh, some of those more toxic professionalism issues, that's when you talk about, we might need to get this person off the bus. They're not going to fit.
Right.
So
Yeah,
just to add flavor to that, it can be a casting problem, but we always encourage people to think about, might able to manage around that or manage through it.
Yeah.
Yep.
I agree. I think going straight to a casting problem, I love that term. I think that is it's not a good instinct. It is a normal instinct. I would argue that the first piece would be, do you truly know that person's strengths? Do you know what they're working on? Have you really leaned into better understanding them and really showing that you are for them? The cost of retention, the cost of turnover, the cost of hiring and onboarding, anywhere between 30% for like newly minted lower level employees to upwards of 300 to 400% for high-level executives, according to Gallup. So if you're moving straight to this process of like moving, recasting, changing, turning over, that's costing your business a lot of money, your organization, a lot of expense. And so I would say like a lot of what we're trying to get at here is that knowing your people is a huge part of it. So I'm going to turn it back to you, John. I think there's another kind of last point we want to make before we kind of start wrapping up today.
Yeah, I think the last thing we really want to emphasize is this idea of managing versus doing. And so if you've never heard of that, I really encourage you to dig in and to do some self-reflection on how much am I managing my team and managing our results versus I end up doing things for my team or doing things to get towards the results. Funny anecdote about this, when I first became a leader early on, we kind of had a roles and responsibility matrix that we were working with. and somebody had put on there like managing versus doing. And it actually had, depending on your role,
I remember that.
you are managing 80% of the time and doing 20% of the time. People took that, I think, interpreted it in a bad way, as if managers don't do anything, that it's on, the employees under them to do the work while I just manage you towards doing it. Again, another one of those things where managing gets it's a dirty term, because if you're managing, you're doing a lot. I want to make that very clear. It's a very active role. There should be a ton you're doing. And this is a really key thing when it comes to helping your employees actually and believing in them. And so I love this quote. Yeah. I love this quote from First Break All the Rules. It's our last quote from it. The hardest thing about being a manager is realizing that your people will not do things the way that you would. I'm going to repeat that. Your people will not do things the way that you would, but get used to it. Because if you try to force them to, then two things happen. They become resentful. They don't want to do it. And they become dependent. They can't do it. Neither of these is terribly productive for the long haul. This is when people begin to hate mid-level leadership, because you've created conditions where people become dependent on you, or they're resentful of you because they realize that maybe you don't believe in them because you're making them do it a certain way. Yeah. Now, I want to frame this by saying we have to get to outcomes, and you need to make sure that you're getting to the results and that you're getting there in the right way. So certainly you have to coach and develop people towards things and give them advice and ideas, new structures to think through something, whatever it might be. You have to do that. But if your whole goal is just to make a clone of you, just to download exactly the way you would do it so that they can do it that way, number one, you're not going to move the company forward and nothing's going to change. You're just going to be stuck in the same ways for a long time. Mm-hmm. And two, people just don't like that. Or if they do like it, it's because, great, you're doing it for me and I'll do it that way. And then the moment it goes wrong, I as an employee can just say, John, I'm just doing it your way. That's how you told me to do it.
It's disempowering.
And that's when you really, several years into it, really hate being a manager. And too often people put that then on the blame of their employees to say, well, they just don't know how to do it, when actually it's your fault for not leveraging their strengths, understanding that they could find a different approach to it, and then allowing them to do it while still getting to outcomes. So really want people to dive into, am I managing folks based on their strengths? Am I managing them towards a process? Am I coaching them and giving them subtle ideas and support? Or ultimately, do I just say, well, I'll just do it? Or, hey, you have to do it this way. And so really hope people keep that paradigm in of, when am I doing too much and not managing enough? Other thoughts there, Josh?
No, I think we just sit with that one. I think that's such a great point to make. And I think the term that we hope every listener leaves with today is to truly think of your role as a catalyst. Mm-hmm. Catalyst of other people and a catalyst of your organization's goals. And you cannot catalyze if you yourself are the one who is trying to take up all that energy and space yourself. And so I think it's really important to think about this through the self-reflective lens, through the pragmatic lens, and we hope we've covered a bit of both today. And like anything in this domain, the conversations need to continue, and we'll come back to these themes in the future. So we wanted to leave you with a couple of questions for this week, and we'll check your homework next week. 2 to 3 people on your team. Let's start with there. Pick 2 to 3 people on your team. Take out your journal, take out your notepad, whatever it is that you use to write, your computer, and write down the strengths of those people without condition. It's like, well, he's kind of good here. Like, take away the conditional statements. Don't qualify it. Just write down the strengths. Secondly, ask yourself, are they currently on projects that are utilizing those strengths that align to your organization's goals? There's a whole other concept I'll introduce in a future session that really gets at the 70-30 concept. I'll tease you with that. But the idea is, are you putting people in a position where they are meant to thrive? And ask yourself, not theoretically, not hypothetically, but pick those 2 to 3 people and look at their calendar with them, look at it in your own notes, wherever you see that, and ask yourself, are they spending the majority of their time in alignment with where their strengths are meeting our organizational goals? And if not, we need to stop, ask questions, and make a better plan. So that's where I think we'll leave it.
For the dozens of us, as Tobias again said, let's work on making manager a positive word, not a negative one. All right? There are dozens of us.
Rebrand, the rebrand. And with that said, this episode has been Leadership Limbo, where we make space for the tension and tools for the journey. Please be sure to hit subscribe and share this with your friends. We'll see you in the in-between.